affiliated with that. And yeah, I guess we'll get started then. Okay, welcome friends. Thank you so much for joining us for webinar number 99. Okay, I don't know if I was muted that whole time, but okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and get started, folks. Yeah, okay, so we did hear webinar number 99. Yeah, and we're gonna be covering part 5 of our report, Automating Banishment. And we're so lucky to have Mama Paula, organizer at Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. You know, she heads up the police accountability.
Matthias, somehow we can't hear you. Oh, no, sorry. My bad. I'm so sorry. My bad.
It's all good.
Yeah.
We're keeping us at, you know, we're so ready for technical difficulties here at Stop LAPD Spying. We imagine them when they're not there. That's how prepared we are. But yeah, so like I said, we're covering part 5 of the report today, Racial Terror and White Wealth in South Central Los Angeles. This section is pretty heavy and kind of big and dense, so we're breaking it up into 2 webinars. And today's focus will primarily be the racial terror that ensued as a result of the operationalization, the execution of data-driven policing in South Central Los Angeles. And so I want to show folks a passage here from the report that I think, we think sums up the summary of this section. And so I'm going to share my screen. And if we can have a volunteer who's willing to read that for us, that'd be great.
I can read it.
Okay, Mama.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Okay, laser. And I hope everyone knows what laser means, but it stands for LA, Strategic Extraction and Recovery. It's interesting to, just know what that acronym is for. Extraction and Recovery. That's the ENR. Anyhow, laser help automate the forms of violent policing that have always been used to terrorize residents of South Central, including broken windows, policing, proactive and pretextual targeting of Black pedestrians and drivers, stop and frisk, militarized raids, and gang injunctions. Data-driven policing builds on this violent policing, as well as linking it to the displacement, banishment, and gentrification of the community's Black residents. Racialized policing of South Central cannot be separated from the gentrification the community is experiencing today, pushing out the traditionally working class Black and brown communities to make room for real estate speculation, corporate mega projects, and predominantly white displacers. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Mama Paula. Yes, and thank you for spelling out laser for us. And friends, we actually have a study guide that we made up that kind of lays out some of these definitions for us, and we'll be alluding to it in some of the questions on here throughout the presentation. But yes, LASER stands for Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration. And I really like that Mama Paula kind of pointed out the extraction and restoration bit about the laser program. And, it's no secret that when Craig Uchida, who heads up JSS, talks about laser and who it has an impact on, he refers to the communities it affects as tumors. So this type of dehumanizing language is really common throughout these data-driven policing programs, and it's super telling of what its intent is. We saw a similar thing with Jeffrey Brantingham talking about Predpol, comparing community members to hunter-gatherers, hunting for gazelles. in a really dehumanizing way. And so before we head up any further, as we discuss most of this, people are encouraged to plug in questions in the chat and yeah, any comments you have as well. And Mamta, who I think is on the call, was kind enough to provide us with some great grounding questions. And Mamta, I don't know if you want to just take people through these real quick, and we'll revisit them as we go along. But these are just good to kind of keep in mind as we go through this material. So Mamta, did you want to?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so I think we usually come up with a couple of questions to sort of guide us through our discussion groups, and they're just for folks to think about, chime in during our time together, and keep in mind and really encourage folks to ask their own questions and pose them to the group. To the questions that we were thinking about as we were going through this chapter, or what are the different ways in which crime data is used to criminalize and pathologize Black communities, both historically and currently. And I think some of the things that, you know, so we talk about crime data in this chapter, and the way that sort of allows the police to hone in on communities, to carry out the violent gentrification in communities. But there are other ways in which it may not be crime data, but data in general is used to pathologize communities. And, you know, we see that in the context of people qualifying for government services and all the collection of data for, you know, with child protective services and those kinds of regimes, governmental regimes that sort of keep track of you and your family. And then the second question is, you know, corporations like Target, which purchased Palantir for LAPD, funded the regional crime centers, the little fusion centers that are local to LAPD, to LA. They donated police technologies and cameras at Baldwin Hills and Crenshaw District. These corporations play a key role in spreading terror in communities of color, while at the same time laundering their image by making public statements of solidarity in response to police violence. And here, you know, I think at least I was thinking a lot about what happened in the wake of the, you know, George Floyd uprisings and the statements of solidarity that kind of came out. And, you know, how do we sort of reconcile and expose, not just reconcile, but really expose the ways in which these corporate actors are so complicit, both in gentrifying communities and in funding the terror of LAPD. And, you know, how they appoint Black and brown people in leadership roles while enacting this violence on communities of color, and how can we effectively resist such co-optation? And then finally, I think the more general question here is what is the occupation of Black communities and extraction of Black wealth? How is this occupation sort of playing out both on the local and global level? And how do we connect the struggle against AFRICOM, against the colonization, you know, of the African continent that is going on right now, that you know, that the U.S. and its NATO allies are involved in? And how is that struggle, how is that fight connected to the U.S. regime, you know, domestically enacting that terror, and how is that connected to policing and white capital in South Central Los Angeles, more specifically in our chapter? So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Mamta. And I will be plugging those questions into the chat just so folks can keep revisiting them as we go along. We're not going to keep them on the screen the whole time. And yeah, kind of, you know, what Mamta talked about and what Mama Paula talked about earlier. So much, I guess, and when we're thinking about this section in particular about racial terror, I think one thing that kept coming up for us is how anti-Blackness, namely anti-Blackness, is paramount in LAPD racist violence, and how anti-Blackness and this dehumanization has kind of made it permissible to be very explicit and very violent and target the Black community in a very explicit way. But obviously, these corporations like JSS, the people who made Laser and other groups, need to sanitize this anti-Blackness and legitimize it in some way. And a lot of that is through the usage of crime data. So Tiff, maybe you can kind of talk about how crime data is used by companies like JSS.
Yeah. Hi, folks. Tiff, they, them pronouns. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And yeah, so I did want to also just talk, if it's okay, talk a little bit more about like what is Operation Laser? Like, do folks have pretty good understanding of that, or should I just go through that a little bit? Because I think the way that was developed is just very, shows us a lot about what was the intention as well. But essentially Operation Laser, so this was a predictive policing program that was developed by LAPD together with Justice and Security Strategies, a consulting firm that has been a longtime research partner and collaborator with LAPD. And they essentially, while Bill Bratton was still head of LAPD, they were looking for how can they be getting more money for LAPD, and they applied for grant money from Department of Justice. Department of Justice was looking to be giving money to police departments that were interested in experimenting with data-driven policing and predictive policing. So they were saying, okay, who's interested in applying for this grant? What police departments can we give this to? And LAPD said, yes, this is an opportunity to get money for this and to be developing a predictive policing program. So they applied for that grant and got that money. And the way that it uses crime data is essentially with Operation Laser. LAPD, and we see how they do this today as well, just even in the police commission meeting that we had today. Every time we hear more talking about crime statistics and really using their version of their, those crime statistics that they want to lift, that crime that they are tracking, those data those numbers that they are following, we hear them lifting them with the purpose of criminalizing specific communities. And with the case of Operation Laser, what we saw was that LAPD said, okay, we're calling this Operation Laser because we are going to use crime data to specifically pinpoint what are the locations and who are the people that are most criminal. And then we're going to be so specific and targeted with this that it's going to be like a laser. We're going to use a laser the way a surgeon does and extract people. We're going to target those tumors in the community and extract them. And so just this very dehumanizing terms of ways of talking about people, and a complete, obvious disconnect in terms of like how communities actually function, how, people have relationships with folks, and, that you can't just extract people and referring to people as tumors as well. So just kind of the dehumanizing framework of that entire program. But then also the way they used crime data was they said, okay, we'll decide who is most criminal and where is most criminal by, we'll decide what are those parameters, what makes a person most criminal. And they said, like, when looking at criminalizing a person, they had like a list of these are the things that make you at risk for committing crime in the future. And one of those is like, have you had an interaction with police? How many have you had? And for each one of those, you would get a point for your criminality. Have you had, are you in the Cal Gang database? Are you on probation or parole? So they had this description of what makes a person most criminal based on the own data that they had been gathering on folks and generating on folks. And then similar with areas, they had definitions of, well, how many times in an area have we heard the report of shots fired? How many times have we had this, this keyword put on put on reports. And so they kind of made up their own definitions of this is the type of crime that we are going to be going after and that we're going to be targeting with this program. So when we talk about how LAPD uses crime data to justify that response or that action that they want to be taking and to justify the location that they want to be taking, we see how they do that with Operation Laser. And then we see how they do that every day as well. Like in Police Commission today, we hear how they talk about why are they targeting, why this time are they targeting, you know, the areas of South Central, like why this time, like what are they bringing to back that up this time in terms of moving resources, as Moore calls it, moving resources to South Central. So yeah, so that's a little bit about that. Matios, I'm not sure if I missed anything there, if there's anything else, or if folks have any questions on that.
Thank you so much, Tiff. Yeah, we can kind of take a breath there and pause if folks have any questions. And I'll also put up on the screen another excerpt from the report here that kind of touches on how crime data or the conditions they've like kind of chosen to criminalize were used to effectively criminalize people. And so here we have a mention of an internal report dated June 2016 from JSS, the consulting firm that built Operation Laser, that matched location of incidents that LAPD recorded as violent or gun related, and then used census data to link race, age, and additional characteristics to these locations. JSS thereby concluded that this crime was more likely to be located in areas where there's a higher percentage of African American residents, and more likely to be located in areas with lower owner occupied housing and higher female head of households. Yeah. And so, you know, LAPD has obviously been using crime data to legitimize their violence, their racial violence. But one of the other things we kind of talk about often is how crime exists everywhere. And this notion that crime is concentrated somehow in Black and brown parts of LA is inherently anti-Black and false. And so, Mama Paula, I'd love it if you can maybe talk about how crime data is kind of used to push LAPD narratives, particularly the criminalization of folks.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Stop LAPD Spying for putting together this report. It really is comprehensive and it really is important. You know, when I first started with Black Lives Matter back in 2014, yeah, we were just reacting to things that occurred. We were reacting to, you know, state-sanctioned violence. We were reacting to police murders. But when we met Hamid and Stop LAPD Spying, then we began to try to tie together data-driven policing, the information about surveillance, some of the things that we were unaware of. And the thing that I have found so very, very interesting is how all these things are tied together. And it helped us not look at what happened from one side, but to have a little bit more depth and understanding. And the more we looked into it, you know, it is systemic. You know, I learned from Hamid, he said, the system operates as it is planned. You know, when we say, oh, why did this happen? Why did they shoot this guy? Why did they do this? It's planned, and these things can be predicted. You know, when they began to use laser, we believe now that the whole process is stemming from a need or a desire for those who are in control, those who are in power, to change the entire community. You know, as resources within the United States change, people in power want to come back to the cities. They want the cities back. this plan was developed a long time ago. And what we see as policing, what we see as banishment is part of the so-called extraction. Remember, we're talking about extraction and recovery. They didn't just make up those words to be, the acronym to use for their data-driven or predictive policing tactics. They're part of that whole system. And so when we think about what happens within the community, and we think about, especially in Los Angeles, how the Black population has been steadily shrinking in the last, I would say, 30 to maybe 35 to 40 years, is because it is a plan. It is a plan. This extraction is planned, and police are the tool of the system. We often try to look at police in isolation, but they only do what they are charged to do. And when we understand the fact that, the politicians appoint the chief of police carries out whatever missions our political people are trying to carry out, and they in turn are carrying out the wishes, demands, or plans of the wealth. When you talk about gentrification, gentry are those people who are wealthy. Those gentry are those people who make decisions, then others carry them out. Politicians are servants of the gentry. Police are then servants of the politicians. So, we started to really study things in a different perspective and not just think about, why was this individual shot, and why can't this particular officer be held accountable? Because I was not focusing on the incident, but not on the whole system that surrounded and produced the incident. So, it's just, when I think about these things and reading the report that Stop LAPD Spine put together, it helps tie all that stuff together. I was reading the report, and some of the names identified in the report of individuals who were killed in laser zones, like Rishario Mack, like Riddell Jones, like Keith Bursey, who, when those incidents occurred, we tended to look at them in isolation, because if you describe how those incidents occur, they look different. The result was extraction. The result was murder by LAPD, but we were looking at them as individualized or different incidents. And then we began to realize they're in an area that had already been identified through predictive policing. And with that predictive policing, the solution to problems that popped up, the problem of Riddell Jones, allegedly stealing or trying to steal money from a small pharmacy, and she had like a kitchen knife, and the problem of Rishario Mack having a psychological crisis in the Crenshaw Mall, the problem of Keith Bursey having been in conflict with LAPD over a number of years and being a passenger in a car that was in one of those laser zones. All three of the incidents ended up being officer involved murders, as they call it, using that term, officer involved. Many of us say that's just such a ridiculous term. What does it mean, involved? Why are we using that term? Why does the media use it? Why does LAPD use it? But I guess in just kind to wrap up my response to the question is, this is planned. This is planned. So whether or not people are extracted by police actions or by the results of police actions, which means if your next door neighbor ends up experiencing harm for police, you may become frightened if you're a Black person and say, I need to move, I need to leave. So I'm leaving the community as well as those who are actually leaving the community who have been harmed. So it's, you know, it's something that we cannot take lightly. You know, yeah, I think that's all I need to say right now, Matios, but it is a very, amazing thing. If that's my word. And it's also a very terrible thing. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Mama Paula. And, you know, I think, you know, BLMLA has been for me, at the vanguard of Black liberation work here in Los Angeles. And a lot of that is due to the proximity to the community, to the real on the ground work, to the proximity to impacted families. And I think what that proximity does is, you know, BLMLA kind of uplifts the reality of the Black experience here in Los Angeles. And so when Tiff was kind of talking about how, you know, Laser was executed, it was through this location-based and through this person-based policing model. And what that is, and I'll just pull up an excerpt right here, is, you know, officers, gang suppression officers that were just directed to the area to harass whoever they wanted. And so like there was this data in play, but what that data manifested itself as was like the constant harassment, the constant interaction with selected communities. And that's something Black people didn't need this report to know. And that's something obviously BLMLA has advocated for and kind of known. In fact, when we showed this report to Dr. Molina, the first thing she said was, it is a conspiracy. This is, I think, an affirmation, is something we keep hearing of the real lived experience of Black Angelenos. And Mama Paula was talking about some of the names of people who were killed in these laser zones, these laser kill zones. And one of the folks, actually, they might have mentioned, I'm not sure, but is Keith Bursey, who, you know, we were lucky enough to speak to Mary Williams, Keith Bursey's grandmother. And they shared that, you know, the officer that murdered Keith Bursey had actually had an interaction with Keith a couple months prior. And so we know that this constant interaction, this constant harassment inevitably leads to some form of violence for Black folk. And unfortunately, that sometimes means our death in the case of Keith Bursey. And so I want to pause. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How responsive has City Council been, and also like in terms of civil actions like lawsuits? I mean, is there any, is that like a potential, well, not solution, but route or strategy?
And I'm not sure, do you mean around targeting through laser, or through, do you mean police killings, like civil lawsuits through police?
I guess the whole, yeah, everything. I mean, when you said a moment ago that this is conspiracy, I mean, conspiracy can either be a criminal or civil violation. I'm just wondering how this can be
Matios,
challenged.
I maybe respond to that question. I don't think we should use the word conspiracy. I think we should use the word a plan. You know, this is plan. Politicians are part of the plan. When you talk about, you know, settlements, lawsuits that happen as a result of these killings, I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. The council people don't worry about it because the city is self-insured. The city has money to back up any of the liabilities. And of course, that money comes from, you know, the residents, the taxpayers, the income that the city gets. But yeah, they pay off those settlements. They do not see those settlements necessarily as a problem. I think they see them more as the cost of doing the business that they're doing, you know, of moving forward with the plan that, you know, what do you call it? I guess the cost of doing business, you know, there's,
Yeah.
you already.
Cost of goods, I think cost of goods sold or something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever these incidents happen and there are lawsuits and there are settlements, you know, depending on how they you know, want to deal with the facts, they pay off. And they pay off because they're insured, self-insured, and because, you know, that's part of the problem. The billions and billions of dollars are part of the city budget and part of the city money. And as we all know, over half of the city budget, an unbelievable amount now determined to be about $3 billion, goes to LAPD. And part of that $3 billion not only are the operating costs and the costs of the day-to-day officers, but also their pensions and all their other benefits. So $3 billion of the city of Los Angeles's budget goes to LAPD. And, you know, this is what they pay to move forward to their goal.
And
Yeah.
I mean, can there be any pushback or opposition to city council at city council meetings? I mean, the report seems so clear-eyed about what is going on, and I don't know. Have you all tried to? I'm not in LA, but have you all tried to in a united way speak to city council?
Yeah, and you know, yeah, and thank you so much for asking that. And thank you for that response, Mama Paula. I love that you called it a plan, and that's kind of you know, the understanding that we move with at the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is that this is their agenda, this is their end goal. It's to do this harm. This is their intent. So you know, we do bring these matters up at the Board of Police Commissioners, is the body that oversees the LAPD here. And you know, anytime we're fighting against something, we bring it up at the city council, but it's not with the, what we would say, false assumption that, you know, they're going to intercede and save the day and help us, but it really is in, you know, to build power. We're abolitionists over here. So it really is just with the understanding that these bodies intend to do harm, and you know, we're combating against that. But yeah, thank you so much for that question. And to that point, with this plan in mind, I think it's important to visit some of the numbers we see here regarding stops in this section. Like one being that, you know, Black people are 9% of the city population, with the understanding that the laser program does manifest itself as, you know, this constant harassment, this constant, you know, attack and, you know, stopping of Black and brown communities. You know, the report highlights that Black people are 9% of the city's population, but make up 27% of people stopped by LAPD in 2019, with white folks at 29% of the population and only 8% of stops. So it's not, yeah, you know, I think to us, it's pretty glaring that that is the agenda, that, you know, it is this targeted racial violence. Any other questions from folks or comments? Anything from Mama Paula while we still have her?
Oh, okay. No, I do want to speak on stops though. You know, the stops are part of the plan, and you know, we just have to realize that it is a systemic plan, and we have to understand that that's what's going on. But when we talk about what's the guy, Udita, what was his name, collecting data?
Yeah, Craig Uchida.
Yukita, I'm sorry, whatever his name is. But anyhow, I know it started with a U. But anyhow, what he said was that he needed more information. And one of the ways that he wanted people to collect information is through stops, okay? And the stops mean that officers have to stop some people, and they have to stop them within the laser zones, or stop them at the anchor points, or stop them in the area that they're talking about. And they have to complete those field identification cards. You know, a few years ago, we found out through research, I can't remember the research that revealed that so many of the stops, which resulted in them inputting data into the gang database, were false, that they were putting the names of individuals into the gang database that were false. And that information came from where? Came from stops, came from the field, the FI, the field investigation cards. And so again, it was part of the plan to collect that data and to further support their data-driven process that goes back to what we're talking about, the, you know, using that information to really change the community. And when you go back and think about the stops, you know, when it was raised that, you know, the stops were wrong and the entries into the gang database were erroneous and false, they decided to identify a bunch of officers on the street and charge them and say, you guys did the wrong thing. Well, just recently, I think it was yesterday or whenever it was last week, the courts decided to throw out all of the charges against those officers because they said, and the court has accepted, that we did those things because we were instructed. You know, we had a quota. We're supposed to have a number of stops. We're supposed to have a number of entries that go into the gang database. We're supposed to complete a number of FI cards, field investigation cards, and it all relates back to the collection of data. It all relates back to, you know, what we're talking about tonight. And so many of those stops were harmful. Some of them, of course, you all know, end up with the individuals who are being stopped, being harmed, in some cases, even being murdered. We have a member of Black Lives Matter, which some of you might know, who's one of our, he is a lawyer, a young lawyer, Chris Martin, one of our leaders in our litigation and legal team. And he was stopped. He was stopped in South LA because he was going into Watts, where he was mentoring. He goes to mentor a youth group, okay? Because he is a lawyer, you know, and he is trying to do mentoring. He was stopped and pulled over. And in that stop, he asked, why am I being stopped? What did I do? And he said, you fit the description. And he said, what was the description? He said, your clothes. You cannot see what someone's wearing, you know, when you decide to pull that car over. So of course they ran his information, they ran his plates, they ran his license, they handcuffed him and had him standing on the street for nearly an hour because it took them a long time. There was something wrong with their system in terms of, you know, whoever they're communicating with. And they just had him standing there and let him go after about an hour. And, you know, of course, he is appealing it and he's doing a lot of things, but he was an individual, you know, that had resources, had information, could complain about the stops, knew what to do. But so many other people have no idea what's going on, have no idea what happens when they take your name, your address, your social security number, and they ask for, you know, any other information which is invasive. And one of the things they do when they first pull over Black men, probably Black men under 40, they ask, do you have any warrants? Do you have any tattoos? These are the questions that they ask during those stops. And that's some of the information that they put on those cards. And that's some of the information that ended up being deemed, you know, wrong, false, And for a while, LAPD was not allowed to enter any information in the gang database. But again, it goes back to this is part of the process that the officers were going through. They were told to do this. And again, it all relates back to the collection of data and the utilization of that data, you know, for data-driven policing. And yeah, it's you know, all of this stuff relates in so many connects, I guess is the word, in so many different ways that it comes to us. You know, it comes to us from Stop LAPD Spying. It comes to us from the families of these cases. It comes to us from the individuals who experienced it. You know, and it's just all connected. You know, and the bottom line, I guess I want to say is it is so real. It is so harmful, but it is so real. So yeah, that's just my response to that.
Thank you so much for that, Mama Paula. Yeah, so when the LAPD makes these mission sheets for the laser program, they really do have descriptions as vague as black male, 16 to 18. And that's, you know, they use these stops as a means of targeting people who fit that description. And to be clear, you know, the LAPD isn't going around with these numbers and these quotas over on the West Side. You know, laser started in 77th Division. This type of targeting, this seeking out this number of people, that's something specific to Black and Brown communities. And I think that's pretty telling of the intent to do harm. Another place where I think we see how that intent to do harm is kind of clear and emblematic is in the targeting of Nipsey Hussle's store, which is kind of touched on in this section. And so let me that slide up. Oh, hold on now. I'm not sure if folks hear my cat, but if you do, I'm sorry. But yeah, Nipsey Hussle, who folks know his marathon store was located in Slauson, or on Slauson, was actually, that store was designated an anchor point. So anchor points were locations that were explicitly identified to be crime hotspots. And Nipsey, you know, created this store within an opportunity zone, a federally incentivized area to invest in. You know, it hasn't been invested in, is what they say. But Nipsey's kind of pursuit was this Black autonomous, this Black space, you know, to cultivate Black ownership and Black empowerment. And that made him a target. So we saw from mission sheets through TIFF and others' research that the LAPD conducted within a 7-day period 103 stops right at that store that resulted in 3 arrests. And this is all from the same squad car. And so you're not going to get 103 stops anywhere else in LA, but it is this clear, targeted, you know, attack effectively on this one area. And these mission sheets, they are legitimized and kind of, you know, the LAPD uses a system called Palantir to create them. And so, Tiff, I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about Palantir, how it came to the LAPD, and yeah, how it's kind of used to create these programs and to gather this data.
Yeah, I can do that. And yeah, and anyone else who's I'm like, yeah, I can definitely talk about that. And Hamid, if you can possibly jump in with anything, or Shakir with anything I miss as well. But essentially, yeah, Palantir is like a data analysis platform, and maybe folks are already familiar with this, familiar with Palantir, but it's essentially a data analysis massive platform, massive corporation that is very widely used by different corporations and by police departments, governments. And essentially, this is something that it allows police or whoever is using it to essentially pull data to kind of bring data into its analysis platform. And with LAPD, they actually worked with Palantir to kind of create their own tools, which is something that Palantir does. It actually works together with whoever has purchased that software, and to kind of create tools that are going to work best for them. And with LAPD, what Palantir did is they created something called Mission Control. And this was a program that allowed LAPD to create the missions that they would then send cops out on. What Palantir did is it essentially is like this central processing analysis space that sends out all of these connections, all of these tentacles to different data sources, different databases, and connects to them and brings all of that data in. So when we're talking about data points and how Craig Uchida is wanting to be gathering all of the data points and all of the information that they can, and that's still the truth today. What they're wanting to do is to be getting that into their data analysis platform, which is Palantir, because that allows them to start making these connections and basically to start kind of creating this narrative and creating this story of why are they going to be able to stop this person, or why are they going to assume that this area is criminal, and to justify what they want to do. So with Palantir, that was a program that was, and I don't know like the history of the company and all of that, but essentially that was a program that LAPD obtained through, it was a donation that was paid for by Target Corporation. And it was, I think it was solicited by Bill Bratton through the Police Foundation. So essentially the Police Foundation was a way that so I forget how it works, but Target donated that money to the Police Foundation, and then the Police Foundation was able to get that software. So that's essentially how they got it. It was by request by Bill Bratton and facilitated by Target Corporation, facilitated by the Police Foundation, and then has been used very much as the center of their data-driven policing. And and it's essentially, it's very much at the core of their analysis. It did help them generate these mission sheets that we see. And then also just something else to touch on is like when we're talking about in terms of why are they wanting to get all these data points, something that they have done. And when we talk about being able to assign criminality to folks, part of the way that that is done is by understanding their connections to places and their connections to people as well. So because when you have someone that you associate as being a gang member, for instance, and then you are mapping their entire social network, or you are making these connections to, these are the folks that they know, these are the folks that they hang out with, in LAPD's eyes, that gives them justification as to be able to criminalize that person as well. So that is kind of the danger of that type of analysis platform. And those are some of the things that they were able to do with it. So I'm not sure if folks have questions or anything to add on that.
Yeah, thank you, Tiff. And yeah, to me, that makes it, we talk about corporations a bit more, but this is one of the most telling, I think that one of the most apparent instances of a concerted effort, right, between these corporations and the police to kind of criminalize these specific communities. And Hamid, it looks like you have a question, or I'm sorry, you have a comment.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to just build on what Tiff was sharing, and something that Paula was building on as well, that, all of these systems, they provide roadmaps. That's basically, in a very simple way that I understand Palantir's role, that it processes all the information and then it provides this information with sort of a layout but ultimately the decisions are being made by these analysts. And these analysts are individuals. So now when we say that crime is all over the city, and this is where the targeting of people comes in, and this is where it's planned. This is how extraction happens. that crime is not just, and when you look at crime maps that the LAPD releases at the end of the day on Friday every week, it's the whole city of Los Angeles is covered. But it's always to remember that, okay, out of that, ultimately, who is going to be targeted and how they're going to be targeted and what exactly is the motive to go there. So I think just wanted to add that little slant to that too, in the sense that when we are speaking about these data-driven systems as well. And the last thing I would say is that, besides when we talk about police, I think the way the coalition looks at this is about policing of the body. So this data is also accessible and available to various other sectors as well. I mean, law enforcement and the state is one of the biggest data brokers, if you really think about it. Because of the amount of data that they gather, they almost become a broker as third-party brokers, and it is accessible. So now giving Palantir all this information, Palantir is using it to process and in return provide LAPD with roadmaps, but Palantir is also experimenting with this data as well. Palantir is also looking to monetize on this information too. And one quick example is of body cameras, that LAPD will claim that the information for the body cameras and the data is like we are processing it, but yet at the same time, Axon company that creates that is using this data to further build their capacity and experiment. And no wonder now they're experimenting with predicting moods. Like that's what their claim is. So they have reached that stage that it's not just like, your facial recognition and various other things. So which is all, from our vantage point, it's all pseudoscience and hogwash, but just wanted to show that it was just share that how vast and how much this plan is expanding and where this is all going. So what is our fight? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hamid. Oh, go ahead.
So I'm not in LA, and I joined the first call, and then and then this is my second one that I'm dialing into. I think sometimes maybe if you're trying to talk to people, trying to win over people who aren't necessarily as familiar with these issues as you all are, but yet you're wanting to do outreach and inform. I think sometimes if you can break it down to, as Hamid was saying, or saying a moment ago, that, I mean, people are monetizing this. It's your face, it's your data, which is generating millions of dollars not for the city, not for the county, it's for companies, for vendors. And at the end of the day, that's what is driving a lot of this, is profit motives. And vendors are, definitely trying to, not just in LA, but nationally, trying to profit from fear and from old ways of governing. I recently read it, but there are. I mean, I think it's important also to know that people in some towns and states are pushing back. Like, I recently read that, like, in the state of New Hampshire, they are purging automatic license plate data. Like, after, I can check it in a moment, I don't remember offhand. I think it might be after 30 minutes or 3 hours. I might be wrong, but they're certainly not keeping the data around for like 30 days, the way some cities and states are doing. So it sort of seems like in some pockets of the country, people are kind of waking up that, you know what, they're better, we can push back. There are better ways of doing stuff. We don't have to be at the mercy of tech vendors. Maybe this is all old hat to you, so maybe I'm already, talking, I don't know, maybe it's already known. One question I have, so my understanding is that in LA County, they have used active denial system, which is like a kind of, I don't know if you all are familiar with it. It's like a device that when aimed at somebody, it basically has, like, I've never been a target of active, like, from what I understand, active denial system, knowingly anyway, but it can leave like a searing pain. And I just wonder, so apparently that has been used in LA County jails or prisons, and just wondering whether on the outside in civilian life, whether devices like these directed energy weapons have been used on protesters. Or do you all happen to know? Either way.
You know, we can we can revisit that. I know we only have Mama Paula till 7:01, so I do want to touch on that. And you know, we do kind of the coalition has an architecture of surveillance where we talk about the concerted effort between corporations who monetize our data and the police who use it to suppress us. So we can touch on that, but I want to hand it off to Mama Paula before we lose her, just for some last words.
Yeah, and certainly I want to respond to the question about corporations, because I think at the end of the question that you asked, how can we effectively resist such co-option? And you know, the way to resist it, of course, is to lift it up, to make it public, to shine a light on it, you know, to understand what's happening. I mean, when we talk about who makes contributions to the police or to the LA Police Foundation, it is amazing. We talk about Ballmer, who is the owner of the Clippers, who in the county of LA is building a big stadium or whatever you call it, something for the Clippers to play in Inglewood. And again, this is a person who donates money to the police. This is a person who supports the community partnership program. When we talk about Target, which, you know, for those of us with kids and grandkids, is so sad to know the Target is involved into the depth that they are. I'm like, no, we can't go to Target anymore. I told my daughter that. She said, no. But I mean, we need to lift these people up. We need to lift these corporations up. But again, it goes back to what I was saying. They are also part of the system. You know, we might focus on our police, we might focus on our city council, but the people in power are the people with the money, and the decisions they make about which way the system goes, the other parties carry them out. So when we wonder why our council takes certain positions, it is because they know that they are supposed to carry out the plan. You know, when we say we wonder why our mayor makes certain decisions, it's because he knows that he's supposed to carry out the plan. And it is a system. It is designed. It's not each part of that system acting individually. And the more we understand that, the more we can combat it. You know, we talked earlier about how can we impact it? And that's really a comprehensive question. You know, I don't know if we can impact by trying to vote in individuals who seem to have a different level of you know, autonomy or individualism, voting in people who may, you know, try to speak for what they believe in. But many of the individuals that we vote in get co-opted, because once they become part of that system, you know, they acquiesce to what's going on. So yeah, I just wanted to share this information with you, because in reading the report, it brings to my attention my lived experience. I live not far from Slauson Crenshaw and Slauson. And my youngest daughter, who Hamid knows, Nia, who's now 30-something years old, went to high school at a charter school just a block away from the marathon. But when she was in high school, Nipsey and his brother were selling shirts and stuff out of the back of their car in the parking lot. They weren't in that building. And so we kind of have a lived experience and a connection to that particular area. And he was our local hero, when he began to decide that he wanted to buy property, that he wanted to establish something, that he wanted to make change. And as he moved forward toward making those changes in that area, he ended up being killed. And that his killing has not yet been resolved. The individual that killed him is alleged, and we say alleged, to be an informant for LAPD. Who knows what that is? It's an allegation. But to me, the most significant result of that whole thing is just about 2 blocks east on Slauson. There is a low-income community called the Dorset Village. Dorset Village has been in the community for decades. Maybe in the 80s. I'm not sure how old it is, but it was low income, affordable housing. The developer and owner of that particular property is in the process of changing that property, which is really large, has a number of units, changing it to condos, townhouses, whatever, to removing all the people who live there now, many of who still have their rent control, because it said that units that were built before the rent control laws could continue to, to have to maintain the lower level of rent. There are a lot of people in there with Section 8, whatever, that they have decided that they want that area back. They want those people gone. That area is being developed, and Dorset Village, the city of Los Angeles, is reviewing its plans at this moment. The people in that particular community have organized and, are trying to fight back, but it is very difficult to fight back. What resources do they have? They don't own the property. They are renters. The rent control that the city of Los Angeles had from the past, has sustained them, but now it's been decided to change it, and it is in the laser zone. It is in one of the zones. It is only, I don't know if it's 2 blocks east of where Nipsey Hussle, the marathon is, I don't know if it's 2 blocks or less than 2 blocks from that. But again, this is a plan to recover that large development and change the face of it and remove the predominantly Black and brown people who live in it. So when we talk about all of these systems, all of these entities, they are connected. They are connected. What the police do in that area goes back to the fact that there is gentrification, there is the role of capitalism, the role of money, the role of the change that those in power, want to see occurs, and it is occurring. People say, as we speak, yeah, as we speak, and the city of LA, their planning department is reviewing the plans submitted by the owner of that land, and that is in our zone. So in our laser zone. So I just want to, just put that in to talk about lived experience, to talk about that the things that are in the report are not theoretical, they're real. Certainly the way we feel them and the way we express them, is very personal, but yeah, when I read the report, I'm like, hey, that's what's going on. That's what's going on down the street. That's what's going on around the corner. That's the reality that we're facing. So I appreciate, everything that Stop LAPD Spying does. I certainly appreciate the education that you all have given me since, we met up in the police commission in 2014. And I'm like, what are they talking about? I never heard of this before. And now I'm like, whoa. I'm kind of late. I'm catching up, but it's very serious. And yeah, for me, being in the community is very sad. It's very sad, to see all these changes occur, to see people harmed, to see the community change, but to understand where it comes from, the nemesis of all this. So yeah, Hamid, Matios, Tiff, yeah, who else is on here? Shakir, people that I interact with. Thank you, thank you. And thank you for having me on. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Paula, before you leave, just quickly wanted to say that, it was 3 years ago that we dismantled Operation Laser. This was in April of 2019. So, and you remember us, just bringing Asata and then Soberov, and we have that video as well when Soberov wanted us kicked us out. But it was 3 years ago. I mean, it hasn't been that long. That's where I think the sister who's calling in was speaking about the city council and all that. I mean, we know that the city council is complicit. They benefit from this kind of stuff. This is politically, it benefits them. And we've even tried and they give us a lip service, but ultimately it goes back to building that power on the ground, because you can't reform a system that is so rotten to the core. So, but thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your inspiration, and thank you for the power that you bring. So sorry, Matios, I just took that second.
Thank you all. Thank you, Matios, Tiff, the Shakir, the people, Audrey, I saw on here. I can't, I'm on an iPad. I can't see everybody, but thank you all for, just your support, your information, and your hard work, your very hard work. I appreciate it. And most of all, for the information, because we need that information. We need reports like this. We need people studying, researching, and letting us know how all these things intersect and where they come from. So, okay, I'm gonna say good night, and yeah, thanks and bye.
Thank you, Mama Paula. We love and appreciate you. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Yeah, we're so lucky to have Mama Paula able to join us today. Do folks have any questions about what we've talked about so far, or any comments? I do want to acknowledge something Steve wrote a little while ago on here about how local police agencies over in the OC use Disney songs over their loudspeakers while doing a stop. The intent is so that passerby filming can't be used because of potential copyright infringement. The practice was limited, but does give example to how they play and cooperate influence. And, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, but it's astounding to me that like a copyright can supersede like the need and desire to film, potential violence. But obviously they know something. And yeah, so much of part 5 of the report does go on to kind of highlight this concerted effort between corporate interests and the state to enact violence as a means of control and banishment to then commodify certain pieces of land. And they don't really make a secret of this. And there's mention in the report of business cards and the practice of consulting with businesses to quote unquote harden the target, or harden the target. And Shakir, if you're still on, I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about that, what that looked like, and what hardening the target meant, how it manifested itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically, hey everyone, sorry I've been listening in, and yeah, thanks much just for tapping me in. And it's great to also to hear from Mama Paula about that whole history. And actually, wait, can I first say something that she said that reminded me of something earlier? Is that before getting into the Harden the Target thing? Yeah, I really appreciated that, and it's funny that I'm saying this after she left, but that she mentioned that kind of broke down the acronym of what LASER stands for, because this weekend when a couple of us were doing a teach-in about the report and talking about LASER, and we kind of read out that acronym, and we're talking about kind of what that idea of recovery might mean. A couple people in the audience I remember brought up, and I think it was a person who was living in Lemert, and someone else who I think was also from somewhere in South LA was talking about, that recovery, that term kind of, we've been thinking about it in terms of like, it's like the idea of recovering from violence and harm that's implicit in the title. And I think that's part of it, but also this idea of like recovering it for the white wealth, that these were obviously parts of the city that prior to white flight in the 50s and the 60s were those were like the parts of town that white people owned homes, and it was only sort of through racist policies of white flight and school segregation and all of that people started leaving. And what this recovery represents is kind of that return of people. And yeah, I see Tiff. I remember when we were talking about the title of that section 5, there was a point when we were saying maybe we should call it, I think we like one of the working titles we had something about kind of the return of white capital or white return or something like that. We were using that language, and I think we ended up going with, or it's somewhere in there, but that's not in the title. But yeah, I think just even the title of the LASER program kind of captures that. But yeah, in terms of this hardening the target type stuff, I mean, I think the basic idea is just is like these programs are just another part of how police kind of collaborate with business interests, with business owners, with property owners, one to kind of, again, secure white wealth like we're talking about, as well as, and
Okay, I think Shakir might be having some connection issues, so we'll give them a second, or we could, or yeah, or we can even revisit it once they get back on.
Does anybody have any experience or anecdotes, observations about the use of directed energy weapons like the active denial system or anything like that, like to disrupt or to injure or to destabilize?
I'm so sorry, 929. I remember you'd asked that before, but I personally don't. I'm not sure. Hamid's saying we've heard from community members about it. And so Hamid, I don't know if you want to share anything about that, but that's something I definitely like to learn about and look into.
Yeah, we've had over the last several years, we've had people who, and particularly before COVID, when we were more in person, people coming to the meeting, people speaking about it, that the directed energy kind of stuff through radio wave energies and various other things. And how, now with the advancements of 5Gs and the towers that are being installed, so there were a whole bunch of things, and especially in Skid Row. I mean, we've had community members because people are out in the open. So yeah, I mean, just that has definitely been brought up. We've actually been wanting to bring some of those folks together who have talked about it, but Zoom doesn't seem to be a good platform for folks to come in. But we can also, just when we are more in person, our plan was to bring a bunch of folks who had talked about this kind of directed energy. But it's there. I mean, to your question, it has been brought up. It is there. It is something that people have been concerned about. People have even researched it as well. So I have received like people writing their own personal letters about it, and also the material that they have gathered too. Especially one of the two places that constantly come up in this thing is Germany and Israel, as two of the main exporters and practices of directed energy type ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it like basically is active denial system getting used like in the streets at this point, or do you know what the device is, or it's hard to tell?
Well, I mean, the people have spoken about different types of devices. So, just obviously, and then Steve has posted the acoustic weapon, which is like the LRAD, the long range acoustic device that has been used. I mean, this was used very much in Ferguson. This was used in North Dakota around the pipeline. This has been used in LA. So that whole acoustic device has been used by the law enforcement agencies. And then the other energy directed devices have been, there are different types of them. So, but that's a completely different conversation. So maybe when we have that, please keep me on the lookout, and maybe we can have more detailed folks, especially people who have studied this and have expertise in that.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. That might be Shakir. It is Shakir. And so I'm thinking maybe we can get that Harden the Target explanation now.
Hey, yo, sorry, my power went out, which is very weird. It's never happened. Well, it's happened once before, and it was also during a webinar at this exact time, but even in a different apartment. So it's just very weird coincidence. But sorry, I don't know when I lost everyone, but I think I was just starting to talk about like how these are just like another example of how kind of police are collaborating with business owners, property owners, and both to kind of secure wealth as well as to kind of sow division and fear and all that. What's so funny? Okay. Yeah, sorry. And yeah, so I think, part of what that outreach looked like was that the like senior lead officers for different for divisions. Okay, why is everyone laughing? What's going on? Why? I can't see the whole screen, so I don't know what's going on. I can just see Matios, Nina, and Hamid laughing.
Just before you came on, Shakir, we were having a conversation about directed energy type weapons that cause a lot of harm, and then you talked about your light going out, and especially during the webinar. So I just put a message in chat, like talk about directed energy. So yeah, I mean, it takes on different shapes. Or this is redirected energy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. And yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like, but yeah, sorry. I don't know if people are really dying to know what the Harden Target is, so I'll explain it. But basically, it's mainly like kind of LAPD working with business owners, landlords and stuff to kind of talk about changes that they can make to their infrastructure, to, the idea being to make it like less of a target or easier to police. And so that might be security cameras, that might be some of the sort of what we study in the report as crime prevention through environmental design, which is kind of an LAPD term program that's existed since the 90s of like advising urban planners, developers, and architects on how to kind of design the spaces that police are trying to target for policing. So, predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods, predominantly by the kind of communities that police are trying to target, designing them so that there's, for example, less tree cover, less foliage, which makes it easier to surveil, or there's easy lines of sight from the street, so a police car passing by can kind of has a gaze at the whole neighborhood, as well as I think tactics to make it like hostile towards unhoused people, like putting those spikes on like on a ledge or on a bench or planters and those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Do folks have any questions about that? What that looks like?
I have a question if nobody else does.
Sure.
Okay, sorry to be just parachuting into this and then all of a sudden, lobbing all these questions. But one question I have about it was the phrase hardening the target. Is that the phrase that you used?
And that's a police term. It's like kind of, we've seen that in, I don't remember exactly where, Tiff, you might recall, but just, I think it was just kind of in these logs of what the community policing officers, and as part of like their policing of laser zones, what they were doing, which was have people go and talk to businesses about how to harden the target.
How sophisticated is the targeting and the surveillance? So if I may give an example, is it so sophisticated that in a psyop kind of a way, like in a psychological warfare sort of a way, that either an officer or someone who's sort of roped in to like the local neighborhood watch, or like, a local retailer, that they might mimic or imitate the target, or make a very directed reference to something about the target's life. Have you heard any reports along those lines, or is it not so sophisticated like that?
Well, I think harden the target refers to the idea that like the business is the target, and so and they might be, there might be thieves or burglaries or whatever, and so how do you prevent that? And so, I mean, that's just like kind of the police, make it harder to rob or harder to and rob is maybe kind of an obvious one. It's also harder for people to just even, make it easier to keep unwanted people out, or to keep unhoused people off the stoop and that kind of thing. So that's what they mean by hardening the target. Like the target is the place that police are saying a crime is going to happen.
I see. So it's not referring to the person as much as an area, vicinity.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, well, the target there is not the target of surveillance, but the target of, future speculative crime.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and like just wanted to give another example. Like I think I've heard them also talk about like cars that way as well. So just talking about like, how they're always kind of giving this very useless like crime advice about like how to, hide it, keep it, whatever they say. So for instance, if you're hardening the target, meaning making your car harder for people to get into. So it's just, so that's just another example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Have you all heard of anything along the lines of what I was describing, which is a sort of psychological warfare or a psyop tactic in which the details of a person, so I'll say a target's life or conversation, some intimate or some personal information about them, is weaponized against them in a psyop kind of a way. Have you all heard any reports along those lines? And if you don't understand, I'm happy to provide some examples if it sounds a little strange or if it's abstract to you.
Yeah, I think we've heard of all sorts of practices within like infiltration of movements and whatnot, but I think more specifically, when we talk about racial terror through the laser program, and specifically within the Black community, um, its implementation, what Tiff had kind of described through the deployment of like gang detail officers, two gang detail officers who would target one specific person from a chronic offender bulletin, which is just an arbitrary list of people that they've decided to go after. They would often just follow this person incessantly, follow their children, follow their mothers, show up in their backyards, just be ever present in their lives as a means of intimidation, which I think would qualify for me as a psyop tactic. I think that the goal there is to distress them to a degree that would cause them to leave, right?
Mhm.
I think the other component of that when we talk about psyops is, especially when we talk about racial terror and the targeting of the Black community, is this gaslighting that I think, yeah, I can speak from my own personal experience being a Black person, but and Mama Paula had talked about this before, but the understanding that you are under constant observation, under constant harassment. Driving while Black is a widely cataloged phenomenon, and although it's referred to colloquially, it's acknowledged by quote unquote official groups too. So just understanding that your lived experience is one of constant observation and constant stopping and constant harassment, but having official bodies saying no, it's not. And I think that's a psyop in itself, and meant to do some harm. And I think that's how we see it manifested here specifically. But I'm sure Hamid has some examples. He's bringing up COINTELPRO, or some other, or the pervasive presence of helicopters. That's another thing for sure.
Mm.
Just the constant, and I don't know if you've been to LA, but um, there's just constantly helicopters in South LA and Mid City over here. And I remember, like, even as a kid in summer nights having to negotiate between, do I sleep with the window open to get that cool air in, and then have to deal with having to hear helicopters, which would keep me up. So that does have an effect. It is this, it's a constant onslaught, which I would
Mhm.
consider to be a psyop for sure.
Yeah, one of the most pervasive now, at least for the last 25, 30 years, police operations, one of the primary mode of operation is behavioral surveillance, which is part of the broader intelligence-led policing programs. And that also, there is another side to it too. It's not just about watching people's behavior. And there was an interesting study done by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine back in 2008 that spoke to or spoke about behavioral surveillance. And one of the things which they said that there is no evidence that behavioral surveillance can work in police. But what it can do is, which one can also think of it as psyops as well, that it forces people to change their behaviors when they feel that they are constantly being watched, which then makes them further suspect in the eyes of law enforcement agencies as well, when you're being constantly manipulated. So I think psyops is somehow become this very sort of a sensationalist term, but psychological warfare takes on many shapes. So let's talk to youth and the constant presence of police in their schools and the constant of random searchers. That's a psychological, because it takes a psychological toll on a person as well. So I think it's up to us that how do we even expand our understanding of what psyops is, because it's not just one sort of Secret Service James Bond type operation. It is the primary way to be people to psychologically and emotionally feel criminals and be criminalized as well.
Mhm.
If I could just add really quickly, what Matheus, what you had talked about as well, it just reminded me about when as we were having conversations, right, with folks that were put on the chronic offender list. One thing that we talked with a loved one of someone on this list was about like the impact of like babies as well, and like the constant surveillance that took place. So whether it was they had a camera near their parking lot, and so people, like, the cops would come look at their cars and like check to see what they were doing, and we're constantly like patrolling that area, and so like how youth also have like the impact long-term impacts of youth, seeing their loved ones, seeing their parents kind of being targeted, and the constant harassment, and how that, like, they still remember that, and they talked about like looking at the window, and having that concern and having that anxiety. And so it is very intentional, and it's a way of also like making the state, or like trying to prevent crime by the state telling you like they have eyes on you, or they're like yeah, there's like a surveillance that it's constantly taking place, even though it's like people living their daily lives. And so I also was thinking about Dogon, who's also part of the coalition, had talked about like, even like when you think about unhoused folks and like the hostile architecture as well, like in like even going to Skid Row, right, or where there's like high concentrations, or like where there's a lot of unhoused folks, you have buildings that have sprinklers, and those sprinklers are constantly going on. And so the different tactics that are always utilized to let folks know that they're not wanted or they're not desired in that community, it's definitely like, it reminds me of that hostile architecture as well, and like the different ways that folks are navigating those, like that hostile environment that the state is constantly forcing folks to live through.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Nee. Any other questions or comments about that? Put it up for folks. And this might be a good place to plug. So, a lot of this work was just mapping the laser zones from mission sheets, and we were able to map quite a few due to the work and research of people like Tiff, who put in countless hours, and Shakir. And our goal really is to kind of map all of Los Angeles in this way, map the laser zones within Los Angeles. So if that's something folks are interested in, you can definitely shoot us an email at stoplapdspine@gmail.com. And we've got a work group that's kind of working on that. Or even if you're interested in a specific community, maybe yours, or if you know somebody, who might be.
Thank you.
Thank
One report that you all might want to check out, and it's from a report from a very rural state, so it's not an urban environment, but there was a bit of momentum or movement in the state of Maine to basically defund or just stop funding the state's fusion center. And I think it was a close vote. I might be wrong, but they decided instead, as I understand, to do a bit more of a report. And there's this group that produced like what they called a shadow report about the Maine Fusion Center. And I think that's really interesting to study and to hear about how other states, like I said, New Hampshire earlier, are starting to just, fight back or push back against the state, against a police state, what can be characterized as a police state or surveillance state. So that you all might want to look for that, because it's very interesting. I mean, they've mobilized. I mean, they have lawmakers on their side who, I mean, maybe it's not yet the majority, but they're really invested at this point in doing a thorough analysis of what has the Fusion Center done for us? Like, why should we continue to fund it?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And if you've got a link to it, definitely drop it in the chat. We'd love to, I'd love to see it personally. And so we're kind of reaching the tail end here. And as with, all our fights here at the Coalition, we do tie the the work that we're doing and what we're seeing to a more global movement. And so for folks that have read the report, or maybe you tuned in for the webinar about it, but part one does does highlight how we view policing as a legacy of settler colonialism, and police to be an occupying force, seeking out these resources. And so the third question we kind of posted earlier in the chat was, how's the occupation of Black communities and extraction of Black wealth ongoing globally and locally? How's the struggle against AFRICOM, for example, connected to that, against policing and white capital in South Central Los Angeles? And I think we have 100 examples of how it's happening locally. The constant displacement and gentrification we see in South LA and throughout, that a lot of groups are fighting against, what Mama Paula highlighted, that are happening within these laser zones. But Mamta, if you're available, maybe you can talk about how we see it globally.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matthias. I can share a little bit about Black Alliance for Peace. I think, Matthias, you asked me to share what the organization is. I actually am a co-coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace Solidarity Network for the West Coast region. And BAP is a 5-year-old organization now, just celebrating the 5th year. And the mission of BAP is to recapture and redevelop the historical anti-war, anti-imperialist, pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. And it really kind of came about as, the need to revive the historical opposition that the radical Black movement in this country has had to US militarism and US imperialism abroad. And so I'll kind of read a couple of things from the background and rationalization for the Black Alliance for Peace, and I can post it in the chat as well. Militarized policing, over $4 billion worth of military hardware turned over to local police departments, extrajudicial murders, police executions, the school to prison pipeline, aggressive military recruitment of Black and Latino youth, the normalization of militarism, and general popular support for the militarized strategy of US global, quote, full spectrum dominance provides the context for and impels the establishment of a Black Alliance for Peace. And so that's sort of the work of the Alliance, engaged in political education, communications, and organizing and movement support work for individuals and organizations. And so in terms of, there are several points of unity, principles of unity that the Black Alliance for Peace organizes around. One of the campaigns is opposing AFRICOM, which is, and I'll post the fact sheet about AFRICOM, but the AFRICOM stands for the United States Africa Command. And what it is it was started in 2008. And AFRICOM is responsible for all US Department of Defense operations, exercises, and security operations on the African continent, its island nations and surrounding waters. And it's basically the establishment of multiple military bases in various African countries on the African continent for the purpose of sort of sharing intelligence, for having a military presence, for essentially paving the way for Western corporations to come into Africa and steal resources, labor, and exploit the land. And so one of the demands rather of the Black Alliance for Peace is the demilitarization of the African continent and the absolute sort of withdrawal of the U.S. troops and U.S. forces from Africa. And it's part of the larger struggle for the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world. And let me see. I'm gonna post. So one of the things, why is the Black Alliance for Peace against AFRICOM? The BAP takes a resolute anti-colonial, anti-imperialist position that links the international role of the U.S. empire, which is an empire based on war, aggression, and exploitation, to the domestic war against poor and working class people in the United States. So that's kind of, yeah, exactly, NATO out of Africa. I'm just posting some of the questions about, why BAP takes this position against AFRICOM. Yeah, and I think to the question that we've been discussing, it's the same sort of policing tactics, the militarization of local police, and as well as foreign occupation of people of color across the world is what kind of links these struggles. And let's see. So here's something that I wanted to kind of read from, which was part of the month of action against AFRICOM. We say the brutality, violence, and systematic degradation of Black life in the colonized zones of the US against Black people by the domestic police is replicated in Africa by the US global police, represented by the Pentagon and US intelligence agencies. And I think, part of our work at BAP and part of our work at the Stop LAPD Spine Coalition is really is to understand that these are interconnected struggles against, decolonization, demilitarization, and abolishing the police at home. So, yeah, well, I'm going to just share a few links in the chat, and that sums it up.
Thank you so much for that, Mamta, and for that brilliant explanation. I think that connection may not be so apparent to folks at the beginning, but as we were talking about it within our group, and I was thinking about it, it's kind of the same anti-Blackness that allows for the permissibility of violence here in LA, that allows for folks to be oblivious about the ongoing colonial efforts and the violence that goes on in Africa. And we see that in the disparity between the attention that attacks in Ukraine get versus what's happening in Tigray. But we also see that through like a lack of knowledge of the US's presence in Africa and what violence ensues because of their presence there. And so I'm really grateful for you for uplifting that. Grateful to you for uplifting that. Did folks have any questions or any comments about how that landed on people? And I said the presence of the US in Africa, but Brad, I see you put NATO out of Africa here, and NATO's presence in Africa is very much inciting a lot of that turmoil too. Yeah, please go ahead.
Right, yeah, NATO in Africa is the collective colonial powers, as well as the United States of America in Africa, and they're part of AFRICOM as well. The NATO alliance, all of those. I've had the opportunity to listen to the Black Alliance for Peace do a few presentations, and I've heard them mention that all of those countries that essentially carved up Africa from the so-called pre-colonial past were all countries that are in there right now doing the same thing again. You know, we've got a new kind of colonial extraction there under the guise of military, you know, providing military support. And, you know, I think the two are linked for so many more reasons than I can describe. But, you know, just to kind of point out some similarities, you know, like here in the United States, or even just here, you know, with Stop LAPD spying, the police are using these kind of military counterinsurgency tactics to go through and, you know, control the land through various, you know, it's colonial practice here and it's colonial practice there, and it's under the guise of helping and community, but really it's to keep their kind of power structures moving and to keep white supremacy and colonization alive and moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Brad. Yeah, they're securing resources at the end of the day. Both parties are. For, yeah, and you know that who's getting those resources is something we're going to talk about in part 2 of this webinar, where we dig deeper into the white wealth that benefits so much from this violence and from this police violence here at home. And so, yeah, I think we're going to kind of wrap it up here. Do folks have any other questions or comments about anything we've covered? If not, we'll make some room for announcements and some information about how you can plug in with us.
This is going to sound kind of strange, but to the person who had the electricity to go off, I don't know if that meant your light bulb getting zapped, but so pardon us, but this might sound a little odd, but you might want to look at the light bulb if your light bulb has been zapped to see if there's any unusual pattern on it.
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry. So they're actually no longer on the call. They had to log off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah.
No problem.
Okay.
Might want to, if I don't know the person, if you want to, you might want to pass that along to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from me? Go ahead.
Yeah, no question. I just wanted to make a few announcements, but just want to like to see if anyone else had any other questions. I'd give a few minutes to, or like if folks wanted to ask a question, but if not, we can get started with the announcements. We are having our War on Youth working group. It's every third Wednesday of each month from 6 to 8 p.m. And you'll be able to access that through Zoom. But let me share screen really quickly, just so folks can have access to both our calendars. If you go to stoplapdspying.org, on our website, there is a meetings tab. If you go to meeting calendar, it'll have information as well about the different workshops that we have and different events that we're going to be at for the week. And so right here has the War on Youth, and you can get the link to the webinar if you emailed the link as well. And then we have a few other working groups as well. But I would encourage folks to take a look and see the different events. We're having a community policing next Tuesday at 9:30, and then an academic complicity at 5 p.m. As well. But if you have some free time and want to like get involved with any of the working groups, I would recommend checking out the website to get information about what other workshops are going to be throughout the week.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. Oh, go ahead, Hamid.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple announcements that tomorrow we're having an Instagram Live at 12 o'clock that on community policing and counterinsurgency, which is but it's being followed by a much bigger meeting in person on April 28th at 7 o'clock outside the LAPD headquarters. So if folks want to mark their calendars, hopefully we'll be able to put it on our calendar as well in the next day or so. So that is going to be where we'll be having a community conversation on, Brad, some of the stuff that you were lifting as well around counterinsurgency and how that is masked under the guise of community policing and all the tactical operations and everything else. So those are happening too. And then next Tuesday is our data-driven policing webinar, where I think we're going to be following up with part 2 of this section of the report. So thank you.
Thank you, Hamid. If there aren't any other, oh, and I linked the Instagram post for that IG Live if folks want to check it out. Should be a really great conversation. And yeah, email us at stoplapdspying@gmail.com if you have any other questions, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. If there are no other questions, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Mamta, Tiff, Shakir. Special shout out to Mama Paula, even though she's not here, for sharing everything she did. I appreciate you all plugging in. Hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Good night.